Nick Schifrin reporting from Gaza. Joining us now in studio is Ambassador Ido Aharoni. He's the Consul General of Israel in New York. Ambassador, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
A number of Israelis are saying that the perpetrators who carried out this abduction and the murder, that these were essentially lone wolves. They may have been part of Hamas. Is that true? And if the Hamas leadership did not sanction this, shouldn't that mitigate the Israeli response?
Well, we know who did it. We know the identity of the two perpetrators. We know that they're well-known members of Hamas in the Hebron area. We know the families they came from. In fact, one of them, his mother said for Israeli Channel 10 that she's actually proud of her son. But above anything, we know what Hamas stands for. Whether they deny it or not, it doesn't really change the fact that
It doesn't change the fact that the Hamas leadership has not sanctioned this? Because, again, that would suggest that this is a more isolated and not an organizational attack.
Look, in the summer of 2005, Israel fulfilled the Palestinian territorial fantasy. We pulled out of Gaza unilaterally until the last square inch, and we gave the Palestinians the key to Gaza. We told them, here, it's all yours. Turn it into an oasis. Turn it into a booming, thriving community. The Palestinians took this opportunity, golden opportunity, since 2006, headed by Hamas, and turned Gaza, instead of turning it into an oasis, turned it into a launching pad where repeated attacks against Israeli. Only in the last several days, several Katyusha rockets landed in our area.
But they were landing in areas that were not populated, and a number of news organizations have suggested that there's some sort of agreement between Hamas and Israel that if Hamas fires rockets that don't land in a populated area, Israel will respond with airstrikes that are also not in a populated area. Does that agreement exist?
Look, I'm not aware of any such agreement.
Is it a smart agreement?
I'm not aware of any such agreement. I can tell you just this. We are determined to make sure that the people who are responsible for this crime, for murdering the three innocent boys, are going to be brought to justice, them and their accomplices. And whether Hamas is interested in assuming responsibility or not is really not the question. There is a general directive, if you may, there is a general commander's spirit, if you may, and Hamas and its membership are acting accordingly, and therefore they are responsible.
There are a number of repeat reports from the West Bank that in the Israeli effort to sort of go into the West Bank and to look for information that as many as 6 Palestinians were killed with clashes with Israeli troops. What would you say to those families, to the brothers and sisters and parents of those Palestinians who were killed?
I think that what the Palestinian society needs to do is to rid themselves of this culture of hatred that produces crimes as the atrocity that was discovered yesterday, the murder of the 3 innocent Israeli boys.
Right, but these Palestinians were involved in the murder of these 3 boys. Again, Israel troops are knocking down doors, are going into homes, people are reacting, and maybe there's some provocation there. But again, innocent lives are being taken.
Look, of course, we're not happy to see innocent people getting hurt. But we are in the midst of this war. It's a century-old war. It's an assault on our right for national Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel. This did not start yesterday. And we know what Hamas stands for. We know exactly who they are. And we are determined to do everything within our power to protect ourselves and protect our citizens.
There was a member of the Israeli cabinet, the Israeli Knesset today, who suggested that Israel ought to build a new settlement in the West Bank to commemorate the lives of those 3 teenagers who were killed. Is that a wise idea?
It's for the government to decide what to do. The cabinet convened already twice under the leadership of Prime Minister. Well, it's not for me to, comment on decisions or statements made by Israeli decision makers. I can tell you, there's in the Israeli government we have a very strict. We're making a very strict distinction between elected officials and civil servants. I'm a civil servant, and the Israeli government, the Israeli cabinet will make a decision, and we will know more about the scope and the magnitude of the Israeli response very soon. I can tell you one thing for sure, there will be a response. Prime Minister Netanyahu said Hamas is responsible and Hamas will pay.
But fair to say, and I appreciate that as a civil servant you're not going to take a position, but a lot of Israelis believe that these settlements are provocative and don't help Israel as a whole in terms of the tensions with Palestinians.
If you believe that the conflict is territorial in nature, then you may hear opinions from right and from left, but I think that what we've seen in the last 19 days and yesterday since the discovery of the bodies, many Israelis ask themselves the big question: what is really the root cause for this conflict? What is it all about? Is it really about land? If it was about land, they could have resolved the conflict a long time ago. The Palestinians were offered several times very far-reaching territorial compromises, and they declined to accept each and every one of them, from Camp David all the way to the Olmert proposal of 2008. But what we're beginning to think now is that this conflict was never really about a Palestinian statehood. It was always about the Jewish state. It was always about our very right to exist.
But Mr. Ambassador, we had an Israeli tell us last night that the perpetrators of this heinous crime would not have been identified had it not been for the cooperation of the Palestinian Authority. And given that help that the Palestinian Authority is giving Israel, why does it make sense to therefore imprison 600 Palestinians, knock down doors, and create so much sort of anger amongst the very people that Israel is trying to rely upon to provide information to stop this?
I'll tell you why. Because the Palestinian National Movement, represented by the Palestinian Authority, is failing to do the one basic thing that every national movement in history did, and that is to face their own opposition. At the end of the day, every Palestinian who believes in a Palestinian state should know that in the eyes of Hamas, in the eyes of the proponents of Islamic rule, Palestinian nationalism is the enemy no less than Israel is the enemy. So the fact that Mahmoud Abbas
But it works both ways. Israeli nationalism can be an enemy to the state of Israel as well, because I know there are a lot of Israelis who, again, don't agree with the settlements.
Yet if you look at the history of Zionism, there was a moment in our history, just as in the history of the United States, when the mainstream of Israeli national movement, of the Zionist movement, was willing to face its opposition from within. That moment never happened in the history of the Palestinian national movement. It's the tragedy of the Palestinian people, and unfortunately it's also the tragedy now of those 3 families that lost their boys.
Ambassador Ido Aharoni, the Consul General of Israel in New York, thanks for being on the program. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.